I quit this manager and not the job because, and I'm not being dramatic when I say this, but I think it genuinely became soul crushing after a while, in multiple ways. One, to see something with so much potential become so substandard, and two, to also just be constantly put through that sense of self-doubt every day. And I mean, even once I got over the self-doubt, there was just a lot of frustration, because then you feel powerless. The self-doubt, at least when there's self-doubt, you can try to fix things from your end and see whether they change. Once you're in a situation where you don't think you can make a difference, then you're just frustrated.
Welcome to The First 2 Years, an early careers podcast from the Ken. I'm Akshaya Chandrasekaran. Since we started the show, we've gotten a lot of emails from people struggling to navigate difficult relationships with managers. And our listener this week, Shantanu, was at his wit's end with his manager at his last job.
In 2021, I started working for an edtech and assessments company in Bangalore.
Shantanu managed communications, fundraising, and partnership. He joined his team in its very early days. His team almost operated like a startup within a big corporation. But slowly, the company started increasing headcount in his team, introducing hierarchy, and putting in place a formal structure. That's when this manager, who Shantanu had trouble working with, took charge as the head of the division and head of his team. Is there like a best part of the job that you liked in your time at this job?
So the good part of this job is that I was given big things to work on, right? I was producing our podcast from day one. I was working on, grant applications. I was award applications. I was doing a bunch of stuff. I was working directly with our CEO as well at some times. So I was working with, not in the senior leadership, not only him, but our CEO, one of our co-founders. And in that way, so I had sort of access to a lot of people, and I could say that I was doing work that felt meaningful.
Okay, so it sort of sounds like, on paper, like you said, the perfect job, right? So what was really the problem?
A lot of my colleagues, a lot of people who worked for him.
The him is the manager we had been talking about.
There was this constant sense of being caught in chaos, and that really took a toll on everyone. Because again, I mean, we were all people in our early to mid 20s at best, right? And there was this, a lot of us were, the company had a knack for attracting good people, but it wasn't great at keeping them in that way because of, things like these. And so a lot of people had similar senses of anxiety. I mean, again, I at various points was prescribed anti-anxiety medication and antidepressants just to get through my day. And that's also, I think, when it came to that stage is when I sort of decided to quit, because I realized that for me personally, I would much rather, I don't know whether other corporate jobs in India would have been better or other jobs in general would have been better, but it was worth finding out and, taking a shot at that. And I know that a lot of other people had similar experiences over here. But interestingly, so because
there was a passive-aggressive movement afoot after his new boss took charge, because the idea of confronting a boss was daunting to many. It can be even more difficult when you're starting out. We had the perfect experts to give people in Shantanu's position some advice. Shiv Shivakumar, one of India's longest-serving CEOs. He's had large corporations like PepsiCo, Hindustan Unilever, Nokia, and Philips. And Nitin Sharma, who's a partner at Antler India, a VC firm. He's best known for tech investing in India and the US for the past 15 years. Both of them are known for their abilities to coach people and transform workplace culture. On today's episode, how to deal with a difficult boss and get back to a workplace culture you enjoy. Stay with us. When Shantanu wrote to us, he mentioned that it was a perfect job. Everything was great except for his relationship with his manager. When you reached out, you kind of described it as your perfect job, which in my opinion, is quite rare for your first job, but it still did not work out and because of the manager. So I want to understand what went so wrong, right? Like, tell me from the beginning.
He's a very ambitious person. His goals for us as individuals and his goals for the team, the organization were very grand. He was very busy, but that didn't stop him from having more ideas. Like there was never, I don't think there was this cognizance of, okay, let's try to get our house in order before jumping to the next big thing. And that is where I think a lot of the friction or a lot of the differences in our approach came to. For me, it was, I used to be somebody who was also always jumping at the next opportunity and jumping, wanting to do more things before this job. But I think being here, I genuinely became fearful of ambition just because I realized what it took to execute ambition. And therefore, for me, it was a question of get your house in order, make sure that the things you're doing are stable, and the people who are executing those things feel comfortable and feel like they have the capacity to go beyond now. Because when we're already chasing deadlines and when we're having funders and project our other stakeholders asking us questions, you don't have the bandwidth to then go above and beyond for something new. But that didn't stop the something new from coming in.
Okay, I'm just going to play the devil's advocate here, right? And this is true of almost every leader or manager, right? That the job is to like want more, think big, and that sort of a thing. So, what really like made this worse for you? Like, what was the emotional cost?
This was my first job, and so I was very nervous, always wanting to do sort of the best I could in that way. But the goals kept changing all the time because it was, like if he had a new idea for something, he had the idea, we had to do the execution. We had the responsibility, we didn't necessarily have the guidance. It was also a somewhat bureaucratic organization to try to sort of get things done. So anything, I mean, all of this work, for example, required budgets and then going to different people in finance, accounting, this, that, and the other. It meant that there were bureaucratic processes we needed to follow, and for him the timeline of his ideas never accounted for the reality of execution. And so it always felt like we were weeks behind our deadlines, even though we were pushing as fast as we could. But it always felt like we were weeks behind our deadlines because reality was just messier. So
Okay, so the feedback loop was broken, and that you think is because
very much, very much. So the feedback again, so the feedback loop in this case, one, it was complicated because again, it wasn't always clear. So when I joined the company, I was reporting to him, but immediately about like a few weeks in, he was then made a division head. There was somebody put in between me and him. And so I was technically reporting to this person, but I was still getting instructions directly from him as well. Soon, this person who I was reporting to and then getting feedback from, she left for another job, partly also because, again, she also did have issues with his management style. And so I was reporting to him again. He was super busy, had a lot of people to constantly, to supervise. Feedback often wasn't there. There would be maybe a couple of rounds of initial feedback where I'd be given the green light, where he'd sort of have a cursory look through things, and if they seemed okay on the surface, it was fine. And then when it came to the final approval, right before things were to go live or whatever, when he actually went through the detailed thing, there wouldn't be like, it would be like, no, this isn't good enough. The feedback came in too late, and again, on a lot of times the feedback was very vague. And I'm quoting him, and a lot of the times his feedback was chamak nahi aa rahi, like I'm not getting a spark from this, and I didn't know what to do with that.
it was year 2006. Facebook had just taken off.
Facebook today opened up its social networking site to the masses. Previously, only college or high school students or businesses could join Facebook. But now anyone with a valid email address can join. And that's got some people very worried about their privacy and the community that they've come to love.
There was a lot of excitement around young tech startups, and Nitin Sharma started his career in an analyst role at UBS Investment Bank in San Francisco in the US.
In fact, if people have seen the movie The Pursuit of Happiness, I worked in the same building that the protagonist worked in. And I literally had a moment where when I got that offer, I was standing right there on the same street and raising up my hands. So Will Smith, yeah, 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 exactly. The same scene when I saw it. I was very moved because it had happened to me. Um, I got into UBS Investment Bank to do technology mergers and acquisitions, and again, like I said, they chose me for my attitude rather than my preparation.
So, what was the Wall Street culture like, Nitin? I think we have gathered our impression from like movies and all of that, but you've lived that. So, what was that experience really like? And because I'm assuming it's very cutthroat and competitive, and the manager is pressed for time, and there's no avenue to do anything about it, and all of that, right? So, tell me a little bit about that.
The culture was essentially Wall Street. So you had a lot of very high achieving managing partners and the rest of your team, cutthroat, hungry for business. So you're competing with Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, trying to win deals. You're pitching to Google and Cisco about why they should buy a company or why they should take your advice to do $500 million of raise and this or that. New things like social networking were just appearing, so you had to think a lot about how that ecosystem would evolve, etc. So very, very exciting, intellectually challenging, but yes, the culture was fairly, perform or you're out.
That sounds crazy. And our listener in question, right? It may not be Wall Street, but is also like kind of operating in difficult circumstances. Like I said, unrealistic deadlines, shifting goalposts, and like very difficult to get feedback. So I think what I'm trying to ask you is like, what would you say to them, like based on your personal experience of having worked in such an environment? It may not be the same, but what would you say to them?
Yeah. So one of the things I've learned now that I'm on the other side and I manage my co-founder Rajiv and I, we manage a team of 20 in our venture capital firm at Antler. And we have a very young group. I think maybe 11 or 12 of the team members are Gen Zs, right? And we fully appreciate that the expectations and the way that young folks like to work today is different. It's healthy. It's in some ways it's more positive, and that's all those are wonderful things, right? But one of the things that I've also realized now, managing versus sort of managing up, is that as the person who's just starting their career sometimes is very ignorant about the number of pressures that are there on someone senior, right? Think of it. I think sometimes this gets missed, right? Because first of all, that person is handling a ton of stress. They are probably looking at 100 things that you don't know about, right? Because your scope of work might be one of the 10, 20, 100 things that they have to think about on a day to day basis. They're also they have their own challenges. Like, many of my peers in my age group have families and kids and other stresses, aging parents and relationships. Lots of things are going on in the background, right? And of course, the higher you go, you're judged on delivering outcomes, right? Not on delivering outputs, right? So think about it. When you're starting a career, you're judged on what inputs you're giving or what output your work is generating, right? But at the senior level, partners, people you are working for are being judged on outcomes. So it doesn't matter that all this work happened or output happened. Did it actually change anything? Yeah, did they move the needle? Did your organization achieve the sales goals or the fundraising goals or something? So all of this is to say that a good strategy would be to start with extreme humility. Assume that your boss, first of all, I want to clarify, if there's a case of someone being toxic or discriminatory, that is a different issue, and most organizations have the people in HR, etc., that you can always speak to. But outside of all that, assume that the person you're working with is dealing with 100 things that you cannot even fathom, right? Now, if you start with that humility, then you get empathy.
I understand that you're painting the picture from the manager's point of view, which is very helpful because it humanizes the whole equation. And because oftentimes your relationship with your manager is very unidimensional, like you're like thinking about what you want from them and what you can get from them, and um, not necessarily transactional, but sort of you have a very myopic understanding of their, you know, of their life and their work at the org and stuff. But in that circumstance, even if I know all this, what is something that I can do?
Most young people in starting your career assume that they should not speak up or they should not approach senior folks, but that's not true in today's world, especially in certain settings like the tech industry and all. I think most managers are evolved. You can just go speak to them. So knock on the door and say, I have this concern, I would love to spend 10 minutes with you. And I think most decent people would hear you out, and if they don't, then you're probably in the wrong place. So then you should go changing the job.
What Nitin is outlining from his experience is what even Shiv believes in from his many decades of coaching leaders. In his popular book, Art of Management, he speaks about this.
So, managing up means aligning the priorities of the organization and your manager to deliver. Because remember, when you're a junior manager, the most important thing which is expected of you is execution. Nobody is looking at you for strategy. There is a plan in place. The company has a plan. The manager has a plan. What he wants you to do is to execute it. So if you want to do that, then what you need to do is to understand your manager very well. So the thing about any manager, difficult or easy, etc., is he has some goals and priorities which he has to deliver to his boss or the organization. You need to understand that. Okay, what is he trying to achieve in his role or job? And then you have to figure out how do you fit into that.
When your boss is being difficult, speak up. But do two things before you do that: exercise some empathy and spend some time understanding his goals, motivations, and incentives. And try to find ways to adapt to that. But how do you realistically have such difficult conversations? Or how do you happen to find out their motivations? When we come back, Nitin and Shiv share some actionable tips to deal with this. Stick around. The problem with dealing with a difficult manager is that you're constantly caught in a dilemma of should you stay or should you leave. If you do choose to stay, then you want to pull out all the stops to try and see if things can get better. And that's exactly what our listener Shantanu did. So I think this is what makes the situation even more sad to me because generally situations are very black and white, right? Like if they do something terrible, they're awful, and like something inappropriate, then you're just like, okay, call it quits and move on. But here the situation is far more gray, I would say, and because it's just this one thing, the manager you're not able to convince. So did you ever try to change him or the situation in any way, any confrontations you had with him directly?
I started pushing back, and that was honestly, it wasn't responded to well. Like he literally in a meeting with the team called me the team's crybaby. So I think at that point, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to do this. I'm going to push back. I don't know whether it's going to help a lot, but I think I'd been able to externalize the problem in that way to some extent in my last few months. And so I tried my best to push back. I tried speaking to other people in the organization about this. It's also hard to talk about this because, again, I know that he was somebody who was deeply appreciated, by people above him. The company lost a great talent who they tried very hard to retain. And again, despite losing that, there wasn't a lot of change that happened. There were other people who left along the way and no change happened. Again, so it was either talking to people who had the power to change things but didn't necessarily want to because the revenue pipeline still looked good, or you were talking to HR who knew what the problem was but still in some ways felt like disempowered to do anything, or you were sort of talking to your colleagues who were going through similar. It was either preaching to the choir or talking to somebody who's deaf. Like it didn't seem like there was a lot to go on in that. Yeah.
So it sounds to me like even in hindsight, you strongly believe that there is no way for you to have reconciled any of these differences that you had with your former manager.
No, I've thought about this a lot. I have, and I think that but that's just it. I genuinely don't know if there was a way to do that. Because of the fact also that this was the experience of so many other people. Like I've stopped believing that I'm special and that I can. I mean, I forget changing. Like I stopped believing I could change the world a long time ago. Forget trying to change my boss, right? Okay, I think maybe not what made this, not him in particular, but this overall situation so difficult and so complicated for me was that I think there was a lot of potential. Like this, it could, on paper, this was the perfect job for me. I was somebody, for example, as somebody who's really interested in communications and storytelling and whatever. I dreamt of like doing a podcast of my own, and here I was getting paid to produce one that I loved. I was getting to write about things that I was really excited about. I was getting to work with smart people. I liked my colleagues. I had admiration at that time for the company senior leadership. And I was, again, as somebody in my first year, I was working very closely with our CEO and with our co-founder, and they were trusting me with stuff that I don't think that they would have. Like, I had access to my CEO's email ID. I could send mails from his like that, so there was a lot of potential in this. It could have been so great. Like, it wasn't just a situation where everything is shitty and then it wasn't a situation where everything is terrible and so you can walk away and just say, you know what, I'm better off without it.
Shantanu had tried everything except confronting his manager directly. Nitin says sometimes the solution is in plain sight.
First things is I'm a big fan of, like, first look inward, right? And like we discussed, start with humility, empathy. And if you feel like you are stretching yourself as much as possible, if you feel like you are acting on feedback, if you feel you have internalized the values of the organization and you're living them every day truly, after all of that, if you have frustration, then you should absolutely knock on the door. And sometimes young people assume that they shouldn't do that. But I think most places, especially, some of the more things like places like startups, tech companies, and even outside of tech now, in today's world, I think, the most of the people you're working for are also in their 30s, maybe, right? Of 40s. So they're not that old. They're actually, they've also grown up in the last 10, 20 years. So they've also grown up understanding the importance of feedback and empathy, etc. So you should just go and share your feedback and share how you're feeling and ask for how you can do it better.
You may not be 100% sure if what you're thinking is right and you'll get what you want. But like Nitin said, there is value in articulating what you need and want, even if it's a failed attempt. Nitin, do you have any tips on how to talk to a really busy manager, right? Stuff that I can easily go ahead and try implementing in my organization immediately.
I was very young, I was very inexperienced, and I was working with people who are legends in the US venture capital industry, right? Often the conversations, they had seen so much. But very frequently they would ask me in a room full of people, what do you think? And I would often start by saying, these are the positives, these are the negatives. And sometimes they would interrupt me and say, no, I didn't ask you the pluses and minuses. I asked you, what do you think? Which is to say that because like the people who are the more senior someone is, they're just managing a lot, as we discussed, and they have cognitive overload. They have serious information overload, and their time is very crunched. So they really respect when someone young can synthesize things and summarize things and say something crisp and smart, and also say something with clarity and conviction. So, for example, what I learned was, what they were asking me about a question about an investment wasn't to say, here are the pluses and minuses, because guess what? Most smart people can do that. What they were asking me was, given all that information, would you invest, yes or no? Now, it doesn't mean that they followed my recommendation always. It means that what they were saying was, have you thought about it deeply enough? Have you done the homework to weigh all of this plus minus and tell me what is your recommendation, right? And that's a hard thing to do, because then you are putting yourself on the line. But that is exactly what, for example, investing is, right? it is not just listing pluses and minuses, it's actually taking incomplete information and saying, given everything I know, I would still invest. Or given everything I know, I would definitely not invest. So I think both summarizing but also having clarity and conviction. Sometimes when you're young, you're not paying attention to that. But if you think about this and you frame it in the right way, actually, most good organizations and most good bosses will love you for it.
Chances are you've tried everything and it still hasn't worked. When do you know it's time to trust your judgment and move on? I asked Shiv. So, Shiv, imagine the most young people that I speak to, right? Like, even if they try and figure out their learning style, the manager's working style, and they're trying to adapt, but it's just not clicking. Like, something or the other just keeps going wrong. And, like you said, they're stuck in their ways. And after a point in time, there's rigidity and, eccentricities start to set in and all of that, right? Like, so, you know, then what do you do? When do you know that this is it?
Yeah, that's a very good question again. Ask yourself, is this a company where I am wedded to my manager for the next 10 years? There are some companies where your manager will not change. There are some companies, and typically all multinational organizations, your manager will change every 2 to 3 years.
Correct.
Okay. So you will see a plethora of managers, not one or two. So which also means, remember, the manager is adapting to you, you are adapting to the manager. When managers change constantly, they will have fewer quirks because they know that when they go, somebody else will come and do the work. It's in their interest to ensure that there is some continuity. If a manager has been there for 10 years and he is not moving, it happens in many Indian organizations, they're just sitting there. That is the more difficult one because he or she is set in her ways. Okay, so then you need to decide very clearly that whether you want to spend those 10 years or after 2-3 years, you say, look, I would like a move to another department or another function or wherever it is. In whatever you are doing, Akshaya, remember, you are the master of your journey. You might spend 2 to 3 years with this manager. You might spend time with 10 different managers. But don't let the manager determine your pace, your speed, and your mental balance. Never do that.
Got it.
Okay. You should never blame your boss, even if he's the worst boss. I've had some terrible bosses, but you have to rise above that. You are the master of your destiny.
Thank you to Shantanu for sharing his story with us, and Shiv and Nitin for sharing all the great advice. If you liked this episode, check out our past episodes about mentorship, bouncing back from a mistake, and cracking your first promotion. Do you have any other questions that you'd like me to find answers to? You can reach out to us, and all the details about reaching out is in the show notes. This episode was written, hosted, and produced by me, Akshaya Chandrasekaran, and sound engineering by Rajiv CN. Thank you for listening. See you next Tuesday.